Welcome, friends, to this session on truth and reconciliation work being facilitated and offered with such generosity by Raghu and Ananthanarayanan of Ritambara, and on the topic of the difficulty of being Dharmic. So Raghu, thanks again for just showing up every year for Truth and Reconciliation Week and work. It's held around the Guru Purnima week every year. And the space you create, the people you bring, and the authenticity of the work that you do for inner truth and reconciliation is just so deeply appreciated. So with that, over to you.
Thank you. I'll have to return the favor you've done me, Nilma, because we got started off all because of your invitation. And that was 3 years ago, right? And Preeti was also part of the co-conspirators at that time. And I think we very quickly agreed on something we didn't know the depth of. Okay, so we really, after the first TRW discussion we did with you, if you remember, about 10-12 of us got into a much longer term work, because we really discovered that the kind of things one has to look at and understand is very, very high, right? So that's what we've been doing for a couple of years. And I think over the years, the whole idea, the framework and all that have crystallized a little more clearly. We've used it in a couple of workshops to test how it's being received. And yeah, so it's very exciting. It's a lot of for us, it's been a lot of exciting, but I think difficult work also. So what I thought we would do today is share the framework as it has come out, and then have dialogues with people as we go along, right? I'm not feeling 100% well. I think I've just recovered from a mild COVID, last few days, right? I had to go to Chennai for my mother's 90th birthday. There was a big gathering, and many of us have come out of it with various levels of fevers and whatever. I'm assuming it's COVID, I don't know, but I've still got a bad cold and nothing much happened except feeling a little tired and down for a couple of days. Yeah, so that's what we will do. We'll share with you clips from a dialogue I had with a couple of my friends, and I've shared it with some people, and we all think it's come out pretty well. It captures the essence of what we are talking about clearly. So we will take you through each clip, which might be about 2.5 minutes or so, and then have a little bit of discussion, and then back and forth and back and forth. Yeah, and people who know my kind of work would also be familiar that I'm not into giving gyan and having some discussion about some third person reality. It doesn't help at all, especially in these kind of things. So what we request each of you to do when you're listening is to reflect on what it means to you. Yeah, and we're going to present you a framework. Very often what happens is, when frameworks are presented, people try to fix themselves in one quadrant or another quadrant or whatever. That is not what we are doing here, because the human mind and psyche is very dynamic. Yeah, so we come up and respond to the world from different parts of ourselves, and knowing where we are responding from, I think, is the point out here. Yeah, so that's the overview. The other critical thing in this truth and reconciliation work is obviously we are looking at the whole reality of what the colonization process has done to the human mind and human reality. Yeah. So I don't think it takes much to look around and see that the world as it is now is the outcome of the last few hundred years of colonization. And it's also clear if you look at it that colonization hasn't ended. Yeah. So we'll have a quick test of whether you understand the processes of colonization or not. Yeah. So the quick test is this. Yeah, I hate to talk to boxes, huh? So some of you have to unmute yourselves and speak up every now and again. When I ask a question, don't just sit there and wait for an answer. You may not get any from me. And if I don't get any from you, then the dialogue ends. Okay? So the question is, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when I use the word Amazon?
River.
A river. Okay.
Forest.
Huh?
Forest.
Forest. Any other responses?
Shopping.
Shopping. Right? Aggregator. Okay. Speak up, Asmita. Don't do this chat box. I'm terrible at all that. Yeah, I don't know how to deal with all that.
Amazon Prime. That's
Amazon Prime. Yeah, so that's exactly the A to Z of colonization. Yeah, if the Amazon is the current violent form of colonization that's been around for 200 years. The money that is made out of this colonizing process is made by companies like Amazon that finally make plastic out of the stuff that we take out of the earth and so on. And finally, Jeff Bezos will come sit in a conference and say, I think I've got to create a set of rockets that will take me to the next place to colonize. Yeah. And the sad reality is that the world we are confronting today has internalized this idea of how to live. So the very deep colonization that's happened in all of us. So we really need to examine this. So that's what we're going to do today, to see what has been the impact of colonization. And the slide, the clips that I'm going to show, will call it the difficulty of being Hindu, because that's where we started from. And as we were working on this, we discovered that any person who is in any way interested in looking at themselves, their belonging, their community processes, and their humanness has to look at this. It doesn't matter where you're from. Yeah, so that's where we are at right now. Yeah, you want to add anything, Naveen, before we open up to the first?
Not at this point, Raghu. Just as we progress. Yes. Not
Yeah.
at this point. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Can you see?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you read literature from, let's say, the Native Americans or the Maoris or whatever, it's very, very clear. They've been completely dispossessed, and there are settlers sitting out there, and the us versus them is very, very sharp. So you can look at colonization, you can own up to colonization easily. Yeah. But in India, it is half-baked. Right? So many people are finding it extremely difficult to own up to the fact that today an Indian is actually a defeated person. He's a person who is sitting on a heritage that has been ruined. Yeah, this fact is very difficult for people to look at, because the moment you look at this, you have to look at your inner hurts, and you have to look at your own trauma. Na? So this is one thing that came up. Yeah. So what did it do? You know, the kind of things that were being talked about at that time by this group was, there's a false sense of being free. Yeah, so we've been free for 70 years, why are you talking about it? That kind of stuff, right? The other is that some of us are holding on to a heritage, like Nilji, that is alive, we know what it means and all that. And there are people who are not willing to look at the ruin that has happened to our heritage. Yeah, there was a friend of mine who had come to India recently. I mean, he talking to me about it. He had brought his mother to South India just to see the temples. And he said that his mother wept when she saw the temples in India, because in the north, you know that the temples have all been destroyed. Yeah, so that kind of feeling people are running away from. The other thing that I found is many of us have internalized the Western ways. We've internalized the enemy, and we deal with other Indians through that frame. Yeah, I'll give you a small example. Now, I was sitting in an airport once with a couple of my friends, right? And then a set of people who are obviously DMK people were coming, and they're always dressed in white veshti and white kurta, or one long shirt, white shirt, and they look very, very dignified and decent in these clothes. And this friend of mine immediately saying, look at all these lungi buggers coming here. Yeah, so the ability to look at this as part of us. So this guy was very educated and things like that, no? So these kinds of things are also very difficult for people to look at. So what came up in our discussion was that while colonization is a reality, we respond to it in very different ways. And an honest owning up of the hurts, pauperization, and so on is unresolved. So if you read Frantz Fanon, and if you read some of these authors who have talked about some of these things, and when I'm sitting in labs where you listen to people at depth, this rage of unresolved victimhood comes through very easily, very, very sharply. Right? And when one person talks about it, the other person is in denial, or because of the way the history has been taught and all that, there's an amnesia. So I came up with this thing. There is, on the one hand, there is a rage, yeah, because one is a colonized person, and the other side, there's a willingness to own up the trauma and look at it and things like that. I see this even in people from Kashmir Pandits who've been thrown out and things like this. And some of them just say, no, we have to be very human, we shouldn't look at this, but they're very genuinely looking at how to deal with the hurt. And I know others who are completely caught with the rage. Yeah, and this is true of most Indians. Right? Then the other question was, how do I experience my belonging? Do I experience it with disrespect and contempt, or with pride and arrogance? Right? So then we put it together, and we get a dynamic. This is not an either or picture, this is a dynamic, and all of us have parts of it, more or less of these parts.
Yes. So what I'd request each of you to do is to take about a minute, right? Reflect on what I've said, and I'd like to hear a few responses before I take you to the next section.
If I may, Raghu,
Yeah,
this
please.
thing of internalizing the enemy, I also have wondered about the kind of Stockholm Syndrome, if you remember, and what that is. That
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So for those Indians and secular Hindus who almost do not want to talk about this and are almost siding on the part of the non-Hindu, so to speak. So it's so strange. I know you can't really explain it, but this internalizing of the perpetrator, the persecutor, and kind of giving your power to that because that's how you had survived. And so you continue to survive by doing that, even though you don't need to anymore. I'm wondering if that is the psychology behind that behavior.
That's one of the responses, na? So there is a range of responses. There are some people who are obviously completely caught up with they may not own it up, but the way I understand it is a phenomenal fear of speaking up against a Western frame, a fear of not using that frame to interpret reality, and a deep fear of owning up one's own shame of belonging. So it's covered up in so many ways.
Namaste Raghuji, Rahul here, may I?
Yes, please.
So one thing which I've sort of realized personally is that because of this overall education system and things like that, which happened in our early days, 20-25 years of our life, it's extremely difficult to even know that what is on the other side. I mean, other as in the Indian side. So we are so much on the other side because of our sort of current sanskaras that we even don't know what is on the other side. For someone, let's say for an individual who accidentally comes up knowing that there is something on the Indian side or the other side, that journey from the current the current constructions or the current schemas which are fully loaded into your system, to go back to that particular thing as an individual is a huge struggle. And what happens is, when you interact with so many people around you who are in that previous mode of communication, many a times even your individual efforts are thwarted, and you go back to the previous ways of dealing and communicating. So as an individual, I have found it's an extremely difficult journey, and I keep on slipping back into the existing existing things.
It is. Yeah, and I hope people see how destructive the colonized picture is. See, if Rahulji, if the new idea that has been of man and the new idea of environment in the world that's been offered through the colonizing process is something meaningful and interesting and something dharmic and something that will help human beings to grow, then we won't have to complain very much, no? The problem is that it has been an extremely destructive process.
True.
Violent, destructive, and inducing of shame and so on, which is why for the sake of human development, one has to confront this colonizing process clearly and call it out. The New York Stock Exchange funds most of the destruction in the Amazon because it's for soya beans and for beef, and that whole cycle is a completely destructive cycle. It's one of the biggest causes for climate change and climate crisis. Yeah, so the issue is, can we stand up as human beings and throw out ways of looking at human beings and ways of looking at the world which are destructive, both of humanness and of the world? Yeah, that's the question, and it is difficult. There's no two ways about it. Otherwise, why are we talking about it? No, it was so easy. Yes, Asmita.
I feel like maybe to hide our shame and guilt about not standing up enough for ourselves, we've taken on this whole garb of compassion and tolerance to an extent where we're willing to overlook atrocities that have happened and try to put on a larger than life kind of image of, our culture. It's okay for people to, assault you, ruin you, do anything. And we are the loving, tolerant kind. And it's told to us that that is what you are. And if you stand up in defiance, then you're not really being a true Indian. I mean, that's how I have sensed it.
Of course. Yeah. Okay, so let's go into the details of the different quadrants now.
Raghuji, very quickly, I just wanted to make that one comment related to the previous one.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that it takes a whole lot of courage, and many a times the fact that we are not standing up, at least individually, I feel that the fact that I'm not standing up gives a huge feeling of guilt.
Good.
So
that's a good start. At least you're not excusing yourself for not standing up, no? Like what Asmita was saying. And these are difficult feelings, so people run away from it.
So one very strong...
Yeah, please. Oh, sorry, I was talking on the thing.
Area is this feeling of hurt, feeling of anger and all that inside, but the whole idea is held in shame. Yeah. So there's a friend of mine who's a film person, and we ran a program a few years back on looking at what it means to be Indian. We took a few clips and things like that and discussed it. The overwhelming idea that came up was we all want to go abroad. We hate this country. If we can't go abroad, we have to imitate the West and therefore feel that we are not in India. That could be one of the reasons why conversion happens. Yeah. So there's a feeling of shame and self-hate and a helplessness about it. And there's a great deal of wanting to be white in so many ways, na? In the ways you dress up, in the way you talk, and lactification, na? Actually using whitening cream. Yeah? And for their own authentic self, they don't give space. Yeah, and this is strong right across the board. I've had in my groups, there are all kinds of people who come. Now, Dalits obviously don't want to own up to their Dalithood. Brahmins won't want to own up to their Brahminhood, and right across the board. So for this set of people and this mindset, to own up to anything of Indian in pride becomes a huge problem. And they are fed with literature. They love the literature of the leftist guys. Yeah, and it becomes, if you look at literature also, you'll find a lot of literature that comes from here in India right now.
Yeah. Let me just add one small thing. We've also been looking at each quadrant as like a drama that is getting played out. Nah? So the drama that gets played out in the first quadrant goes something like this. Nah? So you have this colonizing white guy sitting out there, and you have middlemen who are Indians, or whichever country they belong to that particular thing, and then there are these other people who are being exploited, right? And in this process, what has got set up is all the guys who are the Indians are trying very hard to snatch things from the white, put it on their body so that they'll be acceptable to the whites, and then there are people helping them in this process in the middle. The desperate fight of the person who's in the middle is he's seen by the whites as a white and accepted by them as a white, and they won't, because the moment they do, I mean, if any of you have been through the literature of the poor whites in America, what happened to the Irish people and so on, you have to vomit blood before you're admitted as a white. Yeah? And then the guys who are black desperately want to be white. So they're continuously picking things off the white guys and putting it on their bodies, hoping to somehow transform. Okay? And this is happening over and over and over again. This is called globalization. This is how you start getting caught with ideas of life and buying things and whatever that are absolutely unnecessary for you. Ultimately, resources keep going to the West. That's the issue. Yeah.
Raghu, a couple of stark reminders for me for this quadrant. One seems to be this love for fairness creams, and such a huge market. It continues to be even today after so much of sensitization around this. And even as I was growing up as a teen, I did consider, should I buy? And they were even, when I was younger, there were only fairness cream for women. But when I was hitting my teens, they came out with fairness cream for men also. And I remember thinking, should I buy this? And I didn't, but the thought did come through. And also when second stark thing for me is how often, and at least I was under this impression that English has to be spoken with an accent. English, and there is no, yeah, it has to be like them. And how, so these two, I got reminded of these two as I was growing up. So.
Yeah, we also need to explore what it does to our authentic selves, no? When we get caught with this envy, when we get caught with this need to become somebody who you're not, it's not just that whom you're not, it's impossible to be. Yeah. So Dharampalji used to have this question, nah? He would say, even if you grant that India is what it is because all of us Indians are terrible people, and we have to become like the West, is it possible for you to lobotomize your brain and put a white brain in your head and change? Yeah, and I don't think people realize the depth of uh, of violence. This idea, I have to be like another, and I should not be like me. The depth of hurt and trauma that creates in people, and it only serves that person whom you're envious of.
So Raghu, what's it's evoking in me is just building on what Naveen shared, how, earlier when the matrimonial columns used to come in the newspapers, they are all full of looking for a fair bride. And the very idea of attractiveness is related to the fairness. And of course, Fair and Lovely are building on that side. But the implicit racism inside the country itself that begins with such and such is dark and such is light colored.
Yeah. And it's strange for a country where dark was considered beautiful. Yeah, Draupadi is supposed to be the most beautiful woman. She was dark. Kannagi was dark. And it was the color, whatever was appreciated. The skin tone was appreciated.
Krishna was dark.
Krishna is also dark. Right?
So Raghu, I'm wondering whether this also indicates a deep lack of self-love that we have.
Of course.
And maybe unless we are able to cultivate that and accept ourselves for who we are, we'll never be able to tackle this issue.
Yeah. That's the invitation, Asmita, for us to look at this honestly and say, hey, I seem to have covered up my true self with all of this rubbish. So can I start throwing it out?
Well, Raghuji, I mean, as I said before, I think what has happened as part of our education system is, personally, I don't even know what that self is. I mean, when we say lack of self-love, we even don't know what that self is. And in that eternal attempt to sort of imitate someone, it keeps on kind of going on some different trajectory. So first, even knowing what that self-identity would mean, personally would be something, I mean, that is what I'm anyway attempting to do.
No, Rahulji, what we're suggesting is something slightly different. If you are experiencing this kind of a wish to become somebody else, can you recognize that first?
Yeah.
And throw it out. Now, once I start doing that, then it might become possible that something within me gets revealed.
Agree.
Right? So I can't go searching for myself like in vacuum, no?
Yeah.
But what is concretely available to me is this self-denial and self-hate. Right? So can I look at it and say, hey, this self-hate is making me want to buy Fair and Lovely and put it here and get white skin and therefore be valued. And look at the double bind that happens then, no? Every time I'm valued for the white skin that I'm trying to create, I'm going to be even more scared of my black skin showing up, no? So it's a really vicious cycle. So if we start recognizing this vicious cycle, then we can get out of it. Yeah,
And I
because
think
you don't
Raghuji,
feel useful.
you probably gave this example. I mean, you gave a very sort of a very concrete, very gross example in terms of the skin color, and maybe in that particular domain, just to kind of argue on that particular front, it is maybe it is possible that people are fine with their. I mean, it is just a concrete example. I understand, but what happens in social sciences or academics, for that matter, is unknowingly many a times you kind of label something as white and you want to be that white, and that is very subtle and very and happens extremely unknowingly, and I'm experiencing that thing when, at least in the field of psychology, where people are trying to go behind positive psychology, as if thinking positive psychology as a particular domain of studies is something which is extremely desirable. When I feel that it is shades of whiteness, that when people are trying to do this positive psychology stuff.
Of course. And this is the power of that game, Rahul, where we will then redefine our understanding of the psyche based on frameworks of positive psychology, right? And if you go into the
Yeah.
history of positive psychology, it has taken a hell of a lot from various cultures, quite heavily from Buddhist and Hindu and yogic culture. Yeah.
And just to flag up this one thing, what is now happening is, very recently there was an article in print, or Wire Science, from Kishore Patwardhan on Ayurveda, and so what he is someone in BHU, and what they're trying to say, what he is trying to say is, I'm trying to make sense of Ayurvedic concepts in physiology using the modern scientific concepts, and it seems that it is quite useless. So, as exactly what you said, we assume that the modern framework, the current framework, is the standard framework, and then try to see things from that particular lens,
Of
and
course.
then we find it is useless.
No, that's the idea, na? Behind this whole process, which keeps you internalizing this idea. That's the whole thing, and it's very stupid, because if that person whom you're talking about is really a scientist, he will know that every science has a set of basic axioms on which a science is built. I cannot use one set of axioms to examine a whole body of knowledge that's been created based on another set of axioms. So it's not just, making your skin white, right? It is making your entire, you just don't even know what the axioms of living are. And the strange thing is that a lot of Ayurvedic principles are being looked at in Western science. The amount of research that's been done on taking Ayurvedic medicines and quietly converting it into Western things is very, very high. The number of papers that get written on this is very high. And most of the people who are working on doing this are Indian researchers who are getting paid. Yeah. So
Yep.
that's the sad part.
Raghu, I want to just add and park it. It's interesting, your framework is relevant for all other power-based inequities.
Of course.
For example, because my work with gender and women, I can see how this maps onto that as well.
Of course. That's why I was saying that, we want to get away from saying it's only the difficulty of being Hindu. It's the difficulty of being Dharmic. Yeah. Whichever the frame of reference, if you really look at it, the same things will follow. Yeah, so I'll move on to the next piece.
Then there were other people who are on the other side of this picture. They haven't dealt with the trauma, they haven't looked at it properly, and the anger of that comes through as a reformer and a counter dependent person. Right? So what happens? They deal with, you know, undealt with hurt and unrecognized pride, or whatever, unjustified pride, that we are the greatest, everything came from here, that whole narrative, na? And I'm sure you've heard this, na? These ministers will come and say, we had plastic surgery in Ramayana times, and this kind of thing, and aggressively start to push their point of view. And this aggression is not grounded in a balanced state of mind. Right? And there's a lot of stuff going on here on this also.
Raghuji, this is so very important.
Yeah.
This is so very important because I mean, I've been seeing this at least over last 2 decades or so, when people are trying to say that, oh, you know what, Sant Jnaneshwar, I mean, because I'm more familiar with that literature. Jnaneshwar has talked about this concept, this scientific concept, that scientific concept. I mean, it may or may not, but the thing is, that is doing injustice to Jnaneshwar itself and trying to extrapolate Jnaneshwar into something which probably he's not even referring to. He's referring to something totally different. And with your limited understanding, you are trying to sort of straitjacket Jnaneshwar into something.
And I've screwed both. I've screwed Jnaneshwar in the process. I've not respected him for what he is, and I'm just using his flag or using that stick to beat up all kinds of things. Yeah.
And unfortunately, that is what is picked up by other people. The others also pick that up as something to cherish and share with. And WhatsApp has kind of amplified that whole process, where you only keep talking about nonsense, and then the whole thing about what he has really said is left in the out.
Yeah, and what is important, Rahulji, is in between these two, have I really looked at myself? Have I healed myself? Okay, now this particular incident I was talking about happened in a conference where Subhash Kak was also there. He was the chairperson of that conference, and he had made extremely important points about Indian history, Indian mathematics, yes, history of science and mathematics, and several of the other ideas that have a lot of meaning, which are very, very strongly based on evidence. So what happens, the papers take up this particular statement made by this person and blow it up and completely obfuscate the real things that were discussed in that particular conference with people who are as deeply scientifically based as Subhash Kak.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this reactivity is as useless as the self-hate.
Raghu, some of the so-called fringe groups which indulge in violence in the name of this would fall into this quadrant too. Is that right?
I guess so. Yeah, because many of them who come through what you're calling as the fringe, who are very violently reactive and things like that, no? I have a feeling has two sources, no? One is, the reality is that the Hindu mind and all polytheistic minds, not just the Hindu mind, have been attacked and attacked violently by monotheistic minds for a long time. Right? So one of the reactions is just sheer violence back. No, you beat me, I'll beat you up kind of stuff. Yeah. The other is that you actually don't even understand what your culture stands for. Now there's a Nigerian person, I'm forgetting his name. He's talked a lot about this whole process of what's happening in Nigeria. Right? And that is in stark contrast with what is happening here, because he says that the Nigerian culture, though it is there, it is held in so much shame, right? That if you're not holding up to a Christian point of view and turning around and beating up people who play the drums and who are into the Nigerian culture, yeah, he says it's that violent out there, even now. Right? You look at what's happened to India, it may not be this violent and this blatant all the time, but there is a history of certain kinds of violence. No? So people taking up arms in a sense and fighting it, I don't think is part of this quadrant. I think it's just a reaction to the violence. Yeah. Whereas what I'm talking about here is that I feel terribly hurt at one level, that my culture is not respected and so many things that I know are not respected. Right? But what will I do? I will not go back and find out what my culture actually said. Yeah, I'll just say, look, the Upanishad said this, so and so said this, and like Rahul was saying, simply claim that this was there in the Vedas, and so on. Stuff. Yeah?
Raghuji, this particular quadrant is, I'm experiencing that very often, that it is an extremely dangerous group of people who sit in this quadrant. Yeah. Because I'll give you again another example, and you and others in the group may agree or may not agree with what I'm particularly saying. But this happened when Lata Mangeshkar died. So Lata Mangeshkar died on Sunday morning. It was morning and Sunday and something. And then people started, at least in Maharashtra, people started circulating that Nyaneshwar has said that the right time to die is in the morning and in Uttarayan and this. So I actually went back to Nyaneshwari and saw what actually Nyaneshwar has said. So and again in Bhagavad Gita in 8th Adhyaya there is something on the kal when you die. Yeah. Again, Lokmanya Tilak and Nyaneshwar and even other commentators have very explicitly said that what you do throughout the life is important rather than that period of time when you die. And of course, someone like Nyaneshwar would not talk about dying in the morning, 8 o'clock on Sunday in month of February, but people have reduced that to that. Meaning it was traumatic. It was traumatic to see that the death of Lata Mangeshkar was linked with what Nyaneshwar has not actually said.
Yeah. So we have to reflect on where we are getting caught also with these kinds of things, Rahul. That's the idea.
One of the other evocations very strongly for me right now, Raghu, is like my parents were 19 and 16 at the time of partition, and they came from across what became Pakistan at that time. Overnight, they came from very affluent families, but they actually left everything behind. And I firsthand heard the stories of what really happened, and millions of people, how they were, affected, and how whole trains used to come completely, And then the earlier Bengal famine, where millions died because Churchill decided that it's okay. And some of that history of colonization, even till this state, and now some of the things are coming out in terms of what were the agendas and papers behind creating that thing? And some of that, when you look at what, when I, in my US visits, and I had an office in Tempe in Phoenix, so the indigenous area, or when I've gone to Australia and the Aboriginals I've been with, you see the lost generation where in Australia they took away the children,
That's
or
right.
US where with the hundreds of million, 130 million probably they killed with those blankets which were with virus. There's so much violence that has happened, and in not too far back, just in the recent history. I wonder, in the truth and reconciliation, without actually acknowledging it and calling it out for what it is, how does even one move forward?
Of course, that's exactly the thing. Nah? But Anil, the important thing is, if one doesn't own up where the impulse is coming from, you're just reacting without really understanding where the energy is coming from. So you're misusing that energy in a sense. See, the energy of hurt and the energy of trauma are very powerful energies. Yeah, they're raw, extremely powerful energies. If I don't understand them properly, I can very easily be manipulated. See, just like the envy, which is equally raw, and self-hate is manipulated in a certain way to appropriate resources, appropriate culture, appropriate knowledge, right? If my source of hate and my source of trauma are not understood by me, I can very easily be manipulated by politicians and people who want to use it. Right? The whole, this is happening across the globe, na? Today, people are crying hoarse, saying that, the democracy in America is going to die. Yeah, that's precisely because people don't understand the source of their hurt or fear or whatever, and somebody else manipulates it. Right? It's happening all over. It's happening in India, it's happening all over. Right? And some of the
Raghuji, I hope Raghuji,
Rahul.
I hope that the people in that second quadrant which you are currently referring to are not being used by, let us say, a political dispensation or a group of people just to further their agenda. Again, I'm not trying to make any political comment over here, but what I'm trying to say is, if those individuals don't go into the depth of what's happening, it is likely that they may be just used for some kind of a crowd mania or some kind of a and it doesn't see, and then it doesn't translate into anything. It doesn't translate into long-term decolonization or anything.
It doesn't. And this is, if I take Nilima's thing also and what we were saying earlier, this is happening all over now. So if I'm a poor person, whatever community I belong to, it's very, very easy to radicalize me and say the other guy is at fault and convert it into a reactive violence. Right? So we have to look at it ourselves and see where are we coming from, and
Raghu, I love your model, and therefore I'm just deeply trying to kind of embed myself in it. And just the comments here are making me realize, is there yet another axis, which is like maybe the Z-axis on levels of consciousness? So each of these four energies, Apaman, Abhiman, Raudra, and Karunya, can be expressed in lower levels of consciousness and in higher levels of consciousness. So, sometimes you need the Raudra, the warrior energy, to actually go out and then fight the good fight. Sometimes you need the Apaman that is flipped, from humiliation to humility. I know I'm perhaps adding yet another layer here, but It's
No, that's
also the level of
we'll come to
consciousness
that,
with which we
Nilima.
are interpreting those.
No, we'll come to that. It's part of this framework.
Okay.
We'll come to that. Yeah. Yes, Hari and Kavita.
Yeah, no, I was just getting in touch with as I listened of how oftentimes I very distinctly remember the first time I read history books outside of what I learned in school. And I could, and this was the time when I was preparing for the civil service, and I found that I'm not able to really engage with it from a study perspective because it was deeply disturbing me. And there was a lot of anger and a lot of sense of betrayal from, I don't know, I thought, why would not my teachers tell me about these things? Then the second level of it was when I shared some of what I read outside of what was prescribed in conferences. They were completely ignored or not even considered. The cancel culture was there. So these things, the immediate impact of it in me was to put myself in a location where I want to prove this is the only right thing. So it is again the other. So I think it took a long while to really come to a space where, while I know that I am arguing for a different narrative also to be in place, in that process, I don't become violent and put down the other narrative. How do I hold this from a space of truth so that that becomes my anchorage rather than my sense of hurt and betrayal for what has been done so far? I think that has been a very extremely difficult space for me when it comes to this particular quadrant for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, Kavita.
Hi everyone. Sorry, I'm not going to put on my video because I'm traveling in a car and I'm just going to show my face for 2 seconds, but I'm going to shut it off. Hi everyone. So I think while listening, I think one of the things that was striking me was that while we talk and give examples of these are the kind of people who do this and these are the kind of people who do that, I find within me also this sense of self-exploration which says, do I not do this? Because I think this entire dialogue is not about how somebody else is responding or how a group of people is responding. And I just wanted to bring that in for myself and maybe for the rest of the people, that it is really about each of these quadrants inside us and how we often operate from one or the other. Of these and I think these dialogues are a lot more about self-exploration, not just as a group of people and as Indian or as Hindu or whatever identities we hold, but until we have the power and the authenticity to internalize this dialogue and say, I am the retaliator in these situations and I am the one who is feeling anger or getting evoked or having fear in these situations. So I think I find that often difficult because it's easier for me to intellectualize, and that's also something that our education system has often sort of taught us, to separate the mind from the body and just say, okay, I will use this part of myself now and not use my whole self. And I just wanted to bring that part in because I find that also as something which has an influence. It is a social narrative which I think is derived from somewhere else. It's not part of the Indian rooted philosophy of this mind-body divide. So I know I'm going in two different places, but I think all of it for me has to be about my own journey and myself within the context of where I am. So I find it difficult to say they do this. And I think I often try very hard to practice I am doing this in this situation. So I just wanted to put that out there as a thought.
Yeah. And in the meanwhile, you've also raised some few extremely important points. I'll just touch on them and then move on. The very fact of instrumentalizing oneself is a deep internalization of colonization. Yeah, because if I look at Gyaneshwar, so Rahul will be very happy. He talks about being ownerless in whatever I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when that concept, and I think most polytheistic cultures don't hold the idea of ownership very strong, which is why they're able to be community based and sharing and things like that. Yeah. But anyway, that's going into a whole different level of history. But that's the mind, that's the mindset that has impacted the world. Because colonization, we must remember, came from the East India companies. They led the whole process. So it was a very clear, violent way of taking other people's resources. So completely instrumentalizing themselves also in the process. It's not that they only harmed everybody else. The whole psyche, the human psyche has got instrumentalized and fragmented. Yeah. It's getting to be 10:30. Let me just give me a moment. I've got to.
And then there is a set of people who are owning up to the hurt, but end up with a feeling of lower status. Okay, a lot of self-pity, a lot of looking for handouts and so on. And these are people who will look at themselves, like there's a friend of mine who's a Kashmiri again, because many of them come to my programs when I discuss these things. He was talking about how he was living 5 homes away, 5 doors away from Lakshmanji. But he never went to Lakshmanju because he thought it is not a right thing to do. But he is very keen on understanding self-development, looking at transformation. And then when he came across this, when I talked to him about Lakshmanju, he was feeling so sad that this is what he had done. Yeah? So there's a whole set of people like this.
Maybe that clip was a little too short, no? Yeah, so this is the set of people who will generally, the drama that happens here is something like this, no? The drama that happens here is to say people are, disenfranchised, you're this, you're that, and, let me help you find your roots. Sorry, no, not find your roots. Let me help you, and so on. And the way you help that person is not helping that person find their roots and find dignity and where they are and act from that, but go in there and teach them things that will uproot them from their culture. Yeah, there's a very close friend of mine called Devjit, who passed away recently, who was working in Orissa on food security, and he's doing phenomenally good work till he passed away. He was talking about the kind of self-hate that is created in Oriya tribes by NGOs, who will come there and who will tell them, no, this is not the way to look at life and whatever. when they have a tremendously powerful culture of ecological sensitivity, of understanding life in ways that are really wise. But the younger people there will be taught things by these NGOs in a way that they will not go and listen to their parents and their grandparents. Right? It's all done with such a nice, reason. I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to help you develop. And the whole idea behind this development thing is to say, become like this. So it's not a violent process or anything. Yeah. It's a so-called benign process. So it will not go into the depth of the culture. It will not go into the depth of the hurt. Nothing. Keep it superficial. Keep it all nice and frothy. But very, very subtly tell the person that you as an Oriya or you as X or Y or Z, is not worthwhile. Right?
Raghu sir, what thoughts are running in my mind right now is, see, we are talking so much about the past, and we are already in a state where we are so confused today as a self. And adding to this new generation kind of information which we are loaded through these forwards, this and that, which keeps confusing us. Though we know little, suddenly we feel we know so much. And then we realize that this is again one set of other group trying to compete, and basically we are confused right now. So in this situation, how do we handle our next generation? We are accountable in one certain way. When I look up to my children, I get confused as in what I should be telling them, what I should ask them to do, the so-called good and bad, which we were told from our parents. Being this is good, being that is not good. So those are the thoughts actually running in me right now.
See, Swarnalata, one thing I don't understand is we are not talking about the past. We are talking about the present. Because all of these processes are happening today.
Yeah, but somewhere it is because of the way we were brought up, right? For what we are today, it's not completely, the childhood and what happened to us is what is making us behave in certain way today. And by the time we realize, or we are in the process of realizing what is happening, it is in a state of the mess up state right now. At least I'm seeing myself in that way. And now when I look up to my elders and when I look up to my children, I see too many things in this small setup itself. And what is that you need to do for your next generation? We lost him, I think.
Yeah, I think connection got dropped.
Should we move to the next video? Park Swarna's question.
No, you can answer if you want to, or you can share your thoughts. I won't say you can answer or something like that.
Yeah, personally, Swarna, as I was listening to you, I'm struggling too. Yeah, I don't think there are easy answers to this. And for me, can I discover? So all I can offer is how Naveen is looking at it, Swarna. Yeah, is can I really try and unlearn these false selves that have been foisted and deeply internalized, and discover something much deeper, from within, inside out, and then perhaps have something valuable to offer and share with others, including my children. But without that journey of unlearning and a discovery of a deeply authentic self, I don't know if just telling them best practices and good things and advice and whatnot is really going to help. It will just leave them more confused, I feel. So first, can I forget about children? Can I really discover that innocence within which I seem to have lost in imitating? And then perhaps some sharing may be possible. Yeah?
Yeah.
Raghu's back. Yeah, Raghu, we were just looking at Swarna's question. We can take the next step for the next video if need be. Yeah? I think you're on mute, Raghu. Raghu, I think you're on mute. Can you hear us? Sorry.
And then, of course, there are people who are saying, let us look at the whole thing honestly, right? Let us be balanced about the reality and so on. And these are writers like Dharam. And then, of course, there are people who are saying, let us look at the whole thing honestly, right? Let us be balanced about the reality and so on. And these are writers like Dharampalji and all that who have occupied this space. Yeah? So what I'm doing in my workshops is asking people to go into each of these spaces and look at themselves and say, when and where am I playing out these kinds of parts of me? So that once you honestly look at it, you can release yourself from that and come to the right-hand side top quadrant. Because each space has its own positives also. Like, for example, our ability to look at where we ought to have done better and where we have not done better and things like that. Like the caste system, you cannot just deny it and say it's not there. Because there are people who are writing papers now who are saying that, you know what, the people who are chamars were such nice people that they decided that they are polluting the town, so they quietly decided to go and live somewhere else. They're all lovely people. They don't have any sense of being oppressed upon. And I've worked with crafts people, I've worked with leather workers and things like that. This is clearly an obfuscation of a fact. Right? And the same way we have to listen to the pride also, because it's important to go back and say, what is it in us that was worthy of pride? And you can't not look at it. At the same time, you can't overstate it. Yeah, so each of these has its positives. So how do I locate myself in an ability to be compassionate with our reality, and at the same time look at it from a sense of honest pride and deal with the whole thing?
Yeah, so the critical thing to look at from this space is a couple of things. Now, one, there obviously has to be a certain courage to look at oneself honestly and say, this is where we've screwed up and all of that. Right? The other is also, how do I have a dialogue with a person who's in any of the quadrants, who are coming at that point of time from any of the quadrants, in a way that we respectfully listen to each other. right? So there are several questions like this that come up, right? And if we can't anchor ourselves in a sense of genuine pride and genuine courage, you can never look at your own culture in a way that says, okay, this is where I can take some threads of this. I can recreate something from my culture that is meaningful. And honestly say there are certain things in my culture that don't have this capability, and let me listen to it and let me learn this. Yeah, because one of the greatest strengths of the Indian mind has been its ability to assimilate. But it is always assimilated in a way that the basic motive has never got ruptured. Right? But what has happened in violent colonization is this basic core gets ruptured or is held in shame rather than being held in pride. Yeah, just the other day I was reading something which sounded very interesting to me. There's this person saying, oh, these judges are all claiming to be, true to the Constitution and all of that. If you look at it a little further and say, where did the Constitution come from? What the judges are saying is, we're very true to the colonizing process and we're taking forward the colonizers' way of looking at human beings and looking at ourselves. Is that independence? Yeah? So what is a dharmic way of looking at reality? What's the dharmic way of governance? All of these are very critical questions, right? And we've worked with it, yeah? And there are lots of Indian models at every level that are extremely powerful, that are still alive, okay? Before Swarnalata says it's all from the past, no? These are all still alive and they work. But they're all held in, somewhere. Okay, so that's this quadrant. So that's the question that all of us who come to a truth and reconciliation work space have to ask ourselves. And like Kavita said, I can't say them, na? When somebody is speaking from any of these quadrants, that's also part of me. How do I honor it? How do I see the relevance of it? And how do I genuinely engage in a dialogue which goes past the current reality? And by the way, we've only come to half the framework. There's another half. I don't know what we're going to do with that. But anyway, the other half, just for you to think about, is the opposite. That it's not we as Indians are only the colonized and the oppressed, but many of us, especially elite Indians, are part of the oppressors also. Right? So we need to look at all of these from that point of view. So, any reflections on this, the sage healer part possibility in us?
Raghu, I'm curious, just like the other three quadrants. Can you hear me?
What happened? Yeah. Yes, Nilima.
The other three quadrants you mentioned have a positive side as well, not just negative. In the same way, does the sage healer have a shadow side?
Of course they would, no?
Yes.
That would be the holier than thou and the possibility of getting caught with exclusivity and things like that. Yeah.
So what I'm taking away is I'm seeing them as your spectrum of Abhiman to Apman as interdependent pairs. If we flipped Apman to humility and Abhiman to pride, that you need both in the healthy expression.
Of course.
Similarly, the Raudram can be flipped to courage and to complement the compassion.
That's right.
And then all four will have a healthy expression and an unhealthy
That's right.
expression.
That's right. They have a functional, there's a process, there's a functional side, and there's a dysfunctional side of each. Yeah, we've worked all that out in a little bit of detail, which, yeah, we can look at some point of time. Yeah, each of them has its relevance, yeah. Because if you simply sit there and if there isn't the other person who shows you a contrasting mirror, it's very difficult for you to look at yourself and say, this is where I'm screwing up. Yeah, but the violence in that process is where the issue comes. See, I was recently reading this book now, The Nutmeg's Curse. Yeah, there are two books that have made me weep when I'm reading them. One is Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, and the other one is Nutmeg's Curse. Yeah, and as I was reading that book, I was thinking, hey man, if this, East India Company, the Dutch East India Company and all this East India Company in particular, yeah, they are the villain of the piece. If they had done honest trade instead of gunboat diplomacy and trade, the world would have been a very, very, very different place in terms of exchange of knowledge, exchange of goods, exchange of resources. It would have been a completely different place. These guys chose to come in, be paranoid about the people whom they were trading with, and constantly keep a gun in their hand with gunpowder dry and everything, while talking to the other guy about trade. And if he didn't agree to your terms, you just shot him down. I mean, how unfair is that?
Raghuji, 2 points. One is this about the Nutmeg's curse, which you talked about, and the whole unfairness in the process of colonization probably was also very, very historical in the, I mean, Europe itself was colonized in different ways, and probably they just continued the legacy.
Of course.
So,
Of course.
hello?
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes I've called the colonizing mind the Roman mind, because they did the same in the rest of Europe.
And the second thing was about the last quadrant, which you talked about, and it's very, very, very interesting to note that, because again,
Rahul, your voice is Rahul, your voice is breaking up. Rahul, maybe you should go off video.
Okay, I'll stop my video. Can you hear me now? Okay, no, so I was just saying that the last quadrant is equally important, because again, in this WhatsApp age, what's happening is we're trying to rationalize everything, as with that Chamar case which you talked about. So I see, for someone, I mean, for our society, we need not do that. I mean, we had Mahabharata, we had that entire clan of Kauravas who was not on the side of Dharma. So we talk about Dharma and Adharma so very comfortably. And why we are so uncomfortable with the fact that even within our societies, there could be an element of Adharma, and it has been there for a long time. But I don't see that happening. I see a lot of people justifying almost anything and everything for no reason at all.
That is an issue, Rahul. This is exactly what we're saying. If we don't own up to these realities, you're going to keep on creating us versus them, not own up to the bad eggs in your own basket, and all of this. If you look at every war, including all the wars that your Marathas lost, yeah, it was all because of some mole inside the system who went and gave the keys to the other guy, no? Those guys didn't come from somewhere else, man. They came, they were your brothers, most of them. No?
So the other versus, I mean, this whole process of othering we and they should be more on dharma and adharma side and understanding dharma and right.
Of course, I agree. And then it comes to within me. What are my triggers? Are my triggers dharmic or are my triggers adharmic? That's exactly right, Rahul, because we started with saying difficulty of being Hindu, and then we discovered that it's not just the difficulty of being Hindu. It's any human being, if they're alive to the crisis of today, and if they don't make a deliberate choice to be dharmic, they're part of the problem.
Raghuji, that's exactly the guilt which I was talking about. So many a times I feel that instead of being on the side of Pandavas and being on the fighting side of Arjuna, probably me and many others like me are on the side of Kauravas. And we, as Duryodhan very rightly said, that he understands what dharma is, but is unable to be on the side of dharma. So I many a times identify more with the Duryodhana.
Yeah, but Rahul, we may not have that luxury for very long. There won't be any world if it goes like this, no? At least human civilization is definitely endangered. There's
No, but that's
more
why the whole courage is required
to
to stand up. The courage is required, and maybe that courage comes from at least being together and talking about it, if not many other.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, it's 11:02, Raghu. Time to wrap it up for now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to thank you, Raghu. Just wanted to share a program that we're doing, some details about a program we're doing, which expands on this much further. Where we'll experientially engage with these 4 quadrants that we've just looked at and the other 4 quadrants that Raghu alluded to, where in India we also inhabit this complex reality of being both oppressors and oppressed, colonizers and the colonized simultaneously. So we're going to explore experientially these 8 quadrants over 3 weekends, 4 hours each, So starting end of July. Yeah. And Hari has just put in the details about it on the chat. Feel free to read up about it, and you're most welcome to reach out to any of us if you have more questions. But we'd love to have you all over in that sort of more hands-on deep dive exploration, where we'll look at both, what is the difficulty of being dharmic and how does both the colonized psyche and the colonizer psyche in us play out. Yeah, and so yeah, most welcome, and we'll look forward to deepening this conversation exploration as we take the journey forward. Thank you, Raghu, and thanks to everybody. And back to Neelima. Yeah, is that what it is? Back to Neelima.
Yes.
Thanks, Neelima. Yeah.
Well, all I can express is just profound gratitude to Raghu and Naveen and this whole team that is showing up to do this self-inquiry, because it's only through the inside-out reconciliation that there can be any hope of seeing it on the outside. And you are such a fabulous model, and it's evolving so beautifully. So I really wish you all the very best in taking it through to its full impact.
Thank you, Neelima. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.